read it, I read Abraham and Sarah. Pretty much.
That's what I do automatically.
Yeah, my mind.
What little's left of them.
Okay, we begin a new series today, and now this is our third series in Genesis. A couple years ago, we did the first 11 chapters, remember, on creation and the flood. And then last summer, just before Acts, we did the end of Genesis with the story of Joseph and his brothers. And now we're going to do the in-between part with the rest of the book, because Genesis a book packed with good stories. So this whole series will cover chapters 12 through 33, as well as chapter 36. We've done 1 through 11, and we've done 34, 35, and 37 to 50. All right, so let's go to the beginning. Abram's promise. I know it's been a couple years. If we remember how Genesis 11 ended, Abraham, and we discussed briefly, was Abraham's father Terah, was he a part of this call to start a new nation? It's kind of uncertain there, but anyway, he left Ur. They went to Haran for a while. There Terah died. And now Abraham is 75 years old. And really, this is God starting to begin his great plan for man. It's been about 1,000 years since the flood, maybe 400 or 500 years since the Tower of Babel. So the nations have scattered. The world has been set. You got your first probably two major empires, I believe, is Babylon and Egypt are establishing now. So, and the world's pretty much plunged into idolatry. And even Abram's father Terah was an idolater, according to Joshua. We're believing maybe at the end of his life he converted to the one God. So God calls Abraham, and it begins here in chapter 12. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. That last note now making reference to Messiah. Jesus would come through his loins, through the nation that would come from him, and that was right. And then all the blessings of the children of Israel all throughout time initiates here when God calls out Abraham. I just wrote down here when we last left Abraham, he had received his call. We discussed whether or not, once again, Terah was involved in this, but now his father's just died. Abraham is 75 and takes his nephew Lot with him, and this is the beginning of God's great plan. So they head for the first trip to the promised land. All right. Now the next section, verses 4 to 9. Abram first enters Canaan land. You'd always heard that's kind of a description of the promised land, and it's, in gospel songs, Canaan land is just inside. This is the first time we really hear about it. It had mainly been populated by Ham's descendants. Ham's grandson, I believe, was named, his son or grandson was named Canaan, and he went, and that was his family, went in that direction and settled the many nations. So, but they were just temporary holders until Abram comes here. All right, so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all the substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. And Abram passed through the land unto the place of Shechem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west, and Ai on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. Abram lived in tents. That means they never were permanent dwellers. He even talks about that in Hebrews, how they were constantly on the move because it wasn't time to settle into Canaan land. But it was almost as if he was going from place to place. In other words, like marking his territory, saying, this day, someday this land is going to be mine. A brief look at Abram's family tree. See if I can go by hard here. Get a marker real quick. Abram had come from Ur of the Chaldees, or Chaldees. That was Babylon. All right, there's Abraham's father was Terah. He just died. He was 205, so the ages are decreasing. Abram lives less than 200 years. All right, he's got 3 sons: Nahor, Haran, and Blee are 3 recorded anyway, and Abram is the youngest. So if Terah is 205 and Abram's 75, that means he was 130 when Abram was born. So they're still living longer than people are now. Nahor died in Ur before they left, died before his father, and his son was Lot. So this is Abram's nephew. Haran apparently stays, that was the next spot after Ur, and Haran comes Rebecca and Laban and all those people who Jacob, remember Jacob was distantly related. We'll just put on here Laban, and I believe these will be his grandchildren, Rebecca, Bekah. And then of course Abram at this time has no children. And 75 back in those days was probably like about 40, 45 today. But still imagine he's thinking, starting to get some age on me, and I don't have anyone to leave my inheritance to. So there's Abram's family background. All right, like I said, Haran, his granddaughter Rebecca would marry Isaac, and then later his great-granddaughter Rachel would marry Jacob. So even though they were distantly related, people did that back then. This like 3rd or 4th cousin. He goes to Shechem first, and Shechem will later appear. That's where Jacob went, and where his sons Levi and Simeon did that rebellion where they killed the people and they had to move, and ended up Rachel dying. And also he then goes to Ai. That's where the children of Israel would encounter their first defeat. If you remember, they took out Jericho, and they said we have an easy win here at Ai, and because of Achan's sin. So, but that's 400 plus years away. So you know, it wasn't time to conquer then. The Canaanites still lived in the land then. And I think here is just kind of just way of Abraham going to place, almost like symbolizing that someday my descendants are going to take this land one by one. I'm walking across this land. All right, then next, this is really the first story of Abram's life, and really probably the first thing where he was out of the Lord's will. Abram goes down to Egypt, verses 10 to 16. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. So Sarah is, if Abraham's 75, she's 65. So, you know, even women can look good at 65, but, you know, Pharaoh, who can have anyone he wants, would not be drawn particularly to her unless 65 is younger than. So picture her as a middle-aged woman, probably 30-something, maybe 40 years old, because you have to remember they're living longer, so they're aging slower. Therefore he shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, Thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Abram was coming to Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair, The princes also of Pharaoh saw her and commanded her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he entreated Abraham well for her sake, and he had sheep and oxen, and he asses, and men servants, and maid servants, and she asses, and camels. Probably among those maid servants was a gal named Hagar, who would show up later into the picture here. So always, whenever there's disobedience, there's consequences. All right. The first line I wrote under this section: has anything good come out of Egypt? Seems like whenever anyone in the Bible goes down there, problems occur, and Abram does this. This is the first mention of this nation. We talked about Ham. One of Ham's sons, I said, is either Canaan. One of Ham's sons was named Mizraim, and Mizraim is another name for Egypt. He was the one who started. So Egypt was started in one of the very first civilizations 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Let's see. Abram encounters famine. That's common in this Middle East. I'm sure it occurs, and I'm sure it's Abram. Keep calling him Abraham. Instead of living by faith, he goes by fear. Sees problems. Says, "Well, I heard there's food down in Egypt." Something his grandson would say hundreds of years from now. There's something going on in Egypt, which led to Joseph and the children of Israel. He appears to be out of God's will. Doesn't specifically say it, but everything that happens is nothing but good comes from this trip to Egypt. He tells Sarah to lie, although we'll later find out it's a half lie or half truth. As a result, Pharaoh takes her in. He gives Abram all these gifts, and Abram, I guess, just passively remains silent. I guess he's saying, "Well, I've got a bunch of things for her. They didn't kill me, and it ain't like they're beating her. They're beating her up. She's having a good life." So the Lord Himself intervenes. He goes, "What are you going to do?" But Abram he was afraid they were going to kill him if he told his wife. He should know God has called him. God has a purpose for him, and he's not going to die. Now, I'll chalk this up to he's early in the faith. Maybe Abram just grew up an idolater, and he's just learning about the God of Abraham. And we know Abram becomes the father of the faithful, which we'll see in a few years what happens with his son Isaac, how great faith he had. So maybe this is the early days. And so we'll chalk it up to that. He's just getting to know God. So the Lord Himself here will intervene, and we'll see this in verses 17 to 20 as we close out this first chapter. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Pharaoh, and 400 years from now, one of your successors will have a lot more worse plagues than these that will come to him. But this is kind of a foreshadowing of what will happen in the future. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this thou hast done to me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Why saidst thou, she is my sister? So I might have taken her to my wife." This makes it sound like he hadn't yet. He said, "Why saidst thou, she is my sister? So I might have taken her to wife. Now therefore, behold thy wife, take her, go thy way." And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away and his wife and all that he had. They get kind of a personal escort, get out of Egypt and don't come back. So that's how that ended there. God has promised Abram blessing and all who belong to him. When Pharaoh's about to take Sarah's wife, the Lord strikes him. He's touching something the Lord has blessed and begins to encounter problems. Doesn't say specifically what the problem is. When this will occur again, the Bible tells us. So Abram's escorted out of the country and maybe learned his lesson, licked his wounds, and said, "I'm sorry, Lord, I wasn't in your will. You told me to go to Canaan land. I went the other way into Egypt, and I'll head back to where you promised me to go to." And now we'll move into the next chapter, chapter 13. Right here, Abram and Lot. And they encounter problems. So all during this time, Abram seems to be a person of some wealth and inheritance. It's 11 generations from Noah to Abram. I don't know what kind of connection that family had. Did Noah have anything did any kind of gold, did he take anything with him on the ark? Abram's, I believe, 3 or 4 descendants down, we have a man named Eber, Noah's great grandson, and he's from, we get the term Hebrew, and Abram is descended from him. And so he's accumulated substance over the years. First in Ur, then in Haran. Says he has many cattle and people, man and maid servants. Plus, when he went to Egypt, the Pharaoh had given him things, and apparently the Pharaoh just let him keep them, just told him to go. So Abram's gathered a lot. Lot's got a Lot, his nephew, and I'm sure Abram is probably in his mind thinking, so well, I'm getting older. It's looking like I'm not going to have any children. Lot is my nephew. His father's dead. I almost view him as a son to me. And maybe Abram is in the process of thinking, Lot's going to be the one who's going to, receive my inheritance, and through him the Lord will work his plan. But the Lord begins to separate Lot from Abraham, as later he'll separate Ishmael from Isaac, and later he'll separate Esau from Jacob. He's like, there's a certain line that I'm choosing, and that's who this is going to happen. All right, chapter 13. And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle and silver and in gold. So Abram had a lot of money. I think in those days, we do talk about the 1%. Very few had a lot, and the rest had little. So he was one of the few that had much substance. And they went on in his journeys from the south, even to Bethel, unto the place where he had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai. So he's back where he started. So that's, however long that trip to Egypt took, that was just wasted time there in his life. Unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelt then in the land. Abraham heads back south, eventually ends up where he left, like I said, before he went to Egypt. Lesson learned, but now a new problem with the abundance that both of them have. This was causing conflict, fighting, I'm sure, around the water holes as they're watering and feeding the animals. And in this section also closes out with something here. Over the years, I think I've learned them all by heart. If you'll remember, all throughout Exodus through Deuteronomy, it talks about the 7 nations that Israel's going to conquer. And it always lists them. Of course, they're all in the sense Canaanites, but it lists Canaanites as a separate one. Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Jebusites. I think Jeb was where Jerusalem was. Perizzites, Girgashites, and I've left one more other out. But two of these 7 are listed here: the land of the Canaanite and the Perizzite. So that's 2 of those. And these 7 nations are still growing and forming. And it's not time for Abram and his family to. First of all, it's just Abram. He has no family to take the land. He has several hundred people with him, but they're not his descendants. They're just people that are with him. God's saying, it's your family that's going to conquer this land. It's your family, I bet, and through this family, I'm going to bless the entire earth. Canaanites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Hivites, Hittites, maybe it's the Amorites. Whatever the case, these nations are still, and we'll find out that I think God says sometime later their iniquity hasn't quite reached the place where it's going to be. They're going to get worse and worse and worse by the time it's for Joshua to come and conquer the land. It'll be time to wipe them out completely. So the problems here with Abram and Lot. So I have to say, what do we do next? So I move down here to verse 8. And Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee. Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. Thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. We believe this to be Moses wrote these books, so Moses, was living after this had happened. So he inserted here, this is before Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. If you're reading the Bible for the first time, today we'd say spoiler alert, spoiler alert. This land that Lot's going to, you know what's going to happen here. Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. I'll read it down too. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. Kind of almost a true story, but it's also spiritual significance to which road will you take in life. I can remember years ago in Sunday school, probably right across the hall here, was either first, second, maybe third grade upstairs, one of those cartoon Bible pictures, and it had Abram there and Lot, and like the two choices before them. And I remember the teacher asking him, if you could pick, which one would you pick? And I picked wrong. I wrongly picked Canaan land, which Abraham said, because I remember there was like mountains over here, and then this was like the plain over here and the little villages. But I'm sure Lot said it was well watered, saw the Jordan River for its flocks, and saw city life, and saw there was some activity and people to go. Lot, it appealed to his flesh, and he took that. And we'll later find out it's absolutely the worst thing in the world. Nothing good came out of this decision, Lot. But it almost appears like the Lord saying, I didn't call Lot. He's related to you, but he's not. I called you, so it's time for Lot's people to go this way, and for you to go this way. I've got more plans to go for. So they separate. And I just wanted to mention too the final verse of this section that I just read. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And then we will see a couple stories on Lot coming up. One, he's kidnapped, and then of course when he's finally removed from Sodom, and then the events that occur after that. Nothing good happened to Lot after this, and he kind of just fades into oblivion. But from his descendants will come two nations who will plague Israel all throughout the Old Testament. These are short chapters here. We're kind of moving through these kind of quick. So how does it wrap up? Genesis 13, 14, 18. So now here's what the Lord has done so far. Let's kind of review back. It's called Abram out. As of unbelief, Abram goes into Egypt where the Lord rescues him there. As a result of the blessings that he has, him and Lot's people have a confrontation. The Lord separates them. Now it's just Abram again, and the Lord's going to appear to him, beginning here in verse 14. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward and southward and eastward and westward. Just picture Abram maybe standing on a mountaintop and viewing the promised land. Now, currently, where the Canaanites are now living. For all the land which thou seest to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if man can number the dust of the earth, thou shalt thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plains of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. Several things to look out here. First, it's Abram alone now, and God makes a promise to him, I will give this land to you and your descendants. How many descendants does he have at this time? 0. Nobody. So I'm sure he's thinking this is probably 4 or 5 years since he began this journey. So he's about 80 years old, but he's received a promise from the Lord. Also, what do we hear on the news even today? Israel fighting for the land. Israel is the only nation on earth that God himself gave them to them. Basically, after the Tower of Babel, people scattered out, and for all human civilization, it's land, conquering land, somebody getting there first, and then somebody coming after him, conquering. That's the whole history of the world. And it's whoever has the most swords wins. Guns now. But this is the one place God said, I've given this to you. It says, look thou northward, southward, eastward, and westward, for all the land which thou seest, I will give it to thee and to thy seed forever. 4,000 years later, his seed still lives there. Just after the time of Jesus, they were scattered all over, but they came back, became a nation just within the last 75 years ago this year, 1948. And now they're there, and we believe this is, the last days as the Lord returns. So even now, they came back to the land. Rise thou, walk through the land, the length of it, the breadth of it, for I will give it to thee. It's almost like, again, Abraham is symbolically walking through, say, Canaanite, you might be over there, Perizzite, you might be over there, Hittite, you may be over there, but one day, my descendants are going to have this land. Abram removed his tents, always constantly wondering, and built an altar unto the Lord. But the things that I want to look at here, I'm sure Abram is thinking, the Lord has promised me this land. He's protected me. He's blessed me. But the main thing I need descendants, and I don't have any. How is he going to bring this about? And this next few chapters where we learn how Abram becomes the father of the faith, how he learns to become faithful, how he learns to step out on do things that don't make sense in his own mind, because nothing seems to be happening, according to what God had promised him. But if we have a promise from God and nothing seems to be happening in that direction, we just have to keep on going, trusting that he's working it out, doing things that we don't see. And that's what Abram did as the father of the faithful. He got up each day, he pitched his tent, did all the activities of leading the people, and then the Lord said, okay, move on to the next place. And imagine a year or two goes by and you go, Lord, still don't have any children left. Sarah's not getting any younger over there. And the Lord just says, keep going, trust me, faith, believe. So we'll wrap up this first lesson today, and this is our third and final series on Genesis. We've explored the initial call of Abram. Next week we'll cover a couple of chapters again, because it's really kind of like short chapters here in this first part. We'll get to some long ones later. Here Abram rescues Lot, so Lot runs into his first problem, and God makes a promise to Abram that will maybe strengthen his faith. So I guess we'll wrap it up with that there. Any questions or comments on today's lesson? Anything brought up? All right, let's close in prayer. Lord, we thank you for this time together. I ask that you bless our lesson. Help us learn from the father of the faithful, Abram, that if you've made a promise to us, something is going to happen. Help us to trust you and know that you will bring it about in the right time. We ask your blessings on everyone in this class and on the remainder of the services today. In Jesus' name, amen. Look for this on YouTube, on
Okay.
channel.
Is that where it's at, Kevin Owens?